The mine had swallowed Nayeli long before she understood what freedom felt like. Years earlier, when raiders descended on her Apache camp, she had been just a girl. She remembered flashes her mother scream, the fire crackling against the night, rough hands dragging her away. Then came the darkness of the mines. The silver mine was no place for human life. It was a jagged wound carved into the mountain, always echoing with the clang of picks, the groans of stone, and the shouts of overseers. Dust filled the air, coating her lungs until every breath burned. Water was scarce, food scarcer still, and the guards ensured no slave lingered in rest. Nayeli had grown from a child into a young woman within those cavern walls, her body hardened by toil, her spirit scarred by cruelty. Each day began before dawn. She and the others were dragged from their cramped barracks and forced to descend into the mine's black belly. There she worked by the light of weak lanterns, carrying baskets heavy with ore. Her shoulders ached constantly, her palms were blistered and raw, and the dull pain of hunger gnawed at her bones. She no longer remembered what it felt like to be full, to be safe, or to laugh that the overseers treated the captives like tools, not people. A whip cracked whenever someone faltered. More than once, Nayeli had seen a fellow slave collapse, never to rise again, their body left where it fell until dragged away. She had learned not to cry. It only earned harsher punishment. She learned to keep her eyes low, her words fewer, her heart locked away where no one could touch it. At night, when the work ended, the prisoners were herded into shacks on the edge of the camp. Wooden slats left gaps for the cold wind to slip through. There were no blankets, only thin mats that stank of sweat and dirt. Nayeli often lay awake, staring into the dark, her body trembling with exhaustion but her mind refusing rest. Dreams of her family haunted her, the faces of parents she could barely recall, the laughter of cousins who must surely be gone. Sometimes she wondered if she had imagined them, if the mine was all she had ever known. The only thing that kept her spirit alive was a stubborn spark buried deep within. She never voiced it, but she carried it always, the belief that this was not how her life was meant to end. She was Apache, descended from warriors who had roamed mountains and deserts with pride. She was not born to die nameless, swallowed by stone. That spark was fragile, flickering in the cold winds of despair, but it never went out. Every now and then, Nayeli would steal a moment at the edge of the camp, gazing at the horizon. The mountains loomed, vast and untamed, their peaks kissed. By sunlight she rarely felt on her face. She would close her eyes and breathe in, imagining herself running free, her feet light against the earth, the wind carrying her far from chains. But the clang of iron, the bark of guards, always tore her back to reality. As the years ground on, the line between girl and woman blurred. The overseers noticed her beauty as she grew, and that danger was worse than the whip. She became adept at shrinking into shadows, avoiding their gaze, hoping each day to remain invisible. Yet fear hung over her like a storm cloud. Still, even as her body weakened and her spirit faltered, something in her refused to break completely. The others around her whispered of escape, though none dared attempt it. To be caught meant torture or worse. But Nayeli, deep in her heart, clung to the thought that one day an opening would come. One day, fate would grant her a chance to run, and when that day came, though she did not yet know it, it would lead her to a man who would see her not as a slave or burden, but as a human being worthy of dignity, warmth, and love. For now, however, she was only a girl in chains, lost in the shadows of the earth, waiting for the light to return. The night it happened began like every other, thick with exhaustion, the air heavy with smoke from the campfires. Nayeli stumbled into the barracks after another endless day of hauling ore, her muscles screaming with pain. She lay down on her mat, too tired even to pray, and let her eyes drift closed. But then the shouting started. At first, she thought it was one of the overseers beating a slave who had collapsed. That was nothing new. But the voices rose higher, sharper, and then came the sound that made her heart lurch. Gunfire. One crack, then another, echoing through the canyon. The guards barked orders, and outside, boots pounded against the dirt. Something was wrong, very wrong. Slaves stirred in panic, some huddling, others rushing to peer through the slats in the walls. Nayeli hesitated, fear and hope battling in her chest. She could hear chaos unraveling in the campmen shouting, horses whinnying, the crackle of flames. Then the opportunity revealed itself. A section of the barracks wall splintered as men fought nearby. Smoke drifted in through the gaps and in. The confusion, a guard left the door unbarred for the first time Nayeli could remember. Her heart thundered in her chest. She could stay, wait for the fighting to end, and return to chains, or she could run. Without another thought, she slipped outside, crouching low. The night was ablaze with orange light as one of the storage sheds burned. Men clashed in the shadows. Some of the guards distracted, their attention elsewhere. The slaves were scattering like frightened birds, some running, others too paralyzed to move. Nayeli's bare feet slapped against the hard ground as she sprinted away from the mine's camp. She didn't dare look back. Every breath stabbed her lungs, but still she ran, clutching her thin blanket around her shoulders. She knew if she stopped, even for a moment, they would catch her. Behind her, angry voices rose. "She's escaping. After her." The word sent a surge of terror through her veins. She darted into the darkness, weaving between boulders, using the landscape she had memorized during years of stolen glances at the horizon. The desert stretched before her, vast and merciless, but it was freedom, and freedom was worth every risk. Hours blurred together. The moon lit her path at first, silver against the sand, but clouds soon swallowed the light. Nayeli stumbled over rocks, scraped her knees, but kept moving. Every sound made her flinch, the cry of a coyote, the hiss of wind through the brush, the imagined hoofbeats of pursuers. Hunger gnawed at her belly, thirst burned her throat, but worse than either was the exhaustion pulling her down. Her body, frail from years of labor and starvation, screamed for rest. Yet she pushed onward, whispering to herself between gasps, "Keep going, don't stop. Don't let them take you back." By the second day, the sun became her enemy. It beat down relentlessly, searing her skin, drying her lips until they cracked. Her feet bled from walking over sharp stones, and every step felt heavier than the last. The blanket she carried became a burden, but she clung to it, her only possession, her only shield against the desert nights. She found no food, no water, only the endless sweep of desert mocking her weakness. Still, she pressed forward, though her vision blurred and her legs trembled beneath her. She prayed silently to the spirits of her ancestors, begging them to guide her. By the third night, she could go no farther. Her body betrayed her, collapsing against the earth. The stars above spun in her vision, blurring into a sea of light. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, no cry for help, no plea. Just silence. For the first time since her captivity began, she let herself think she might die free, under the open sky rather than the mine's suffocating dark. It was a small comfort, even as tears burned her eyes. She curled weakly on the ground, too faint to rise. Her breathing grew shallow, her heartbeat unsteady. Darkness closed in at the edges of her vision. She thought of her family, her people, the home she had lost, and let herself drift into the quiet embrace of unconsciousness. And there, at the edge of death, fate prepared to intervene, because somewhere not far down that lonely trail, a cowboy was riding one who would see her, lift her from the dust, and alter the course of both their lives forever. The sun was sinking low when Caleb Morgan spotted the dark shape sprawled across the dusty trail. At first, he thought it might be a coyote struck down by heat. He nudged his horse forward, narrowing his eyes beneath the brim of his hat. As he drew closer, the truth struck him. It was a girl. Caleb swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion, boots crunching on the gravel. The figure on the ground was young, her body painfully thin, her skin bronzed by the sun yet burned raw at the edges. A ragged blanket clung to her like a second skin, dust-stained and threadbare. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow. "Good Lord," he muttered under his breath, kneeling beside her. He touched her shoulder gently. Her skin was hot, feverish. When he brushed a strand of tangled black hair from her face, he saw. Eyes fled her open dark eyes, wild with fear. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and collapsed beneath her. A hoarse whisper escaped her cracked lips, but the words were lost in the dry air. Caleb raised both hands slightly, a gesture of peace. "Easy now," he said softly, his voice roughened by years on the trail but gentle in tone. "Ain't here to harm you. You're safe here?" Her gaze darted around as though she expected pursuers to appear at any moment. Caleb's gut twisted. Whoever she was, she had run from something bad. The terror in her eyes wasn't born overnight, it was carved into her soul. Reaching for his canteen, he eased it toward her lips. She hesitated then, driven by thirst, took a sip, then another, gulping desperately until he gently pulled it back. "Slow down. Too much at once'll make you sick." She sagged back, exhaustion overtaking her. Caleb studied her closer now. She was Apache, that much was clear from her features. Her long braids tangled with dust, the faint traces of old paint still clinging to her skin. But there was something else about her. The thin scars along her arms, the calluses on her hands, the hollowness in her cheeks. She wasn't just a wanderer. She had been through hell. Caleb scratched his beard, torn. Bringing her along meant trouble. Folks in nearby towns weren't kind to Apache, especially not in these tense years. And if someone had left her in this state, they might come looking. Yet the thought of leaving her here, alone and dying in. The dust sat like a stone in his chest. "No," he said firmly to himself, "not gonna happen." With care, he slid his arms beneath her frail body. She stiffened, a whimper escaping, but she was too weak to fight. "Hush now. Just talking you someplace safe," he murmured, lifting her onto his horse. She weighed almost nothing, like a bundle of twigs. Mounting behind her, Caleb steadied her limp form against his chest. His horse shifted uneasily at the added burden. But Caleb pressed his heels lightly to its sides, guiding it forward. The ranch wasn't far, maybe an hour's ride, but every minute felt like borrowed time as the trail stretched before him. Caleb's mind churned. He had lived alone for years, ever since hanging up his guns after the war and turning to ranch work. His days were quiet, predictable, caring for his land, his horse, and little else. He had long ago decided he was done with people, done with entanglements. But this girl, appearing like a ghost in the desert, shattered that certainty. Her head lolled against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. Caleb tightened his arms around her, a protective instinct rising in him like a tide. Whoever she was, whatever past she carried, she was in his care now. And he knew one thing for certain: he'd see her through this night, no matter what it cost him. As twilight deepened, the faint outline of his cabin came into view. A small place, humble, but solid, tucked against the foothills. He urged the horse faster. Tonight, that cabin would become more than a place of solitude. It would become a sanctuary. And though neither of them yet knew it, it would also become the beginning of a bond that would change both their lives forever. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and smoke. a comforting scent to Caleb but foreign to Nayeli. He carried her inside, lowering her gently onto the narrow cot by the fire. For the first time in years, she was not surrounded by stone walls or overseers' voices, but her body didn't relax. Instead, her eyes darted around the room as if searching for hidden threats. Caleb knelt, stirring the fire higher. Its warmth filled the space, chasing away the desert chill that crept in after sundown. "You'll be safe here," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure she understood his words. She sat rigid, clutching the worn blanket tighter around herself. He set out a small bowl of stew beans, venison, and wild herbs. The aroma filled the cabin. He placed the bowl near her but did not push it into her hands. Instead, he stepped back, giving her space. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out, her fingers trembling. She ate in small bites at first, then with growing urgency, as if fearing the food might vanish. Caleb pretended not to notice her desperation, only refilled her bowl when it emptied. That night, when he moved toward the cot to check on her, Nayeli recoiled, pressing herself against the wall. Her wide eyes brimmed with terror, as if expecting a blow. Caleb froze, guilt washing over him though he had done nothing wrong. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said softly, his rough voice gentler than he thought possible. He backed away, letting her see he meant no harm. She stayed awake long after, staring into the fire as though it were the only barrier between her and the darkness. Days passed, and though Nayeli's body began to heal with food and rest, her spirit lagged behind. She startled at the creak of the door, flinched when Caleb reached for a tool too quickly, and sometimes hid outside among the trees when nightmares overtook her sleep. Caleb didn't press her. Instead, he filled the silence with simple routines mending. Fences, tending horses, chopping wood. He let her watch from a distance, showing through action rather than words that she was not his prisoner. When she dared to edge closer, he welcomed her company with nothing more than a quiet nod. One afternoon, he found her outside by the stream, crouched low, staring at the water as though it were an enemy. She dipped her hands in, then pulled them back, trembling. Caleb realized it might be the first time she'd seen running water without chains at her wrists. He said nothing, only left a tin cup nearby. Later, he noticed it had been filled and drained out at night. The shadows of her past came clawing back. He often woke to the sound of her muffled cries, her body curled tight as though bracing for a whip. He wanted to comfort her, but he knew rushing in would only deepen her fear. So instead, he sat by the fire, humming low tunes his mother once sang. Letting the steady rhythm reassure her she was not alone. Trust came in fragments. One morning, while Caleb worked outside, she brought him a small bundle of herbs she'd gathered. She placed them near his tools, eyes downcast, then walked quickly away. He recognized them: wild sage, used for healing. It was her first offering, her first step toward connection. He didn't thank her with words, only brewed the herbs into tea that evening, leaving a cup for her beside the fire. When she sipped it, a fleeting glance passed between them, her eyes meeting his, uncertain but curious. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something. Caleb understood then that her healing would not be quick. The mine had stolen more than years. It had stolen safety, laughter, and faith. But as he watched her sit a little nearer to the fire each night, her shoulders less tense, he knew patience was his greatest tool. For the first time in a long while, his cabin no longer felt empty. And though shadows still haunted her, he believed quietly, stubbornly, that light could break through. The days at the cabin began to take on a rhythm steady, gentle, unlike anything Nayeli had ever known. At first, she moved through them with the caution of a bird trapped in a cage too long, unsure whether the open sky was truly safe. But as time stretched, small changes began to bloom. Caleb never pushed her. He rose at dawn, tending to his chores with quiet diligence, letting her decide how much of his world she wished to share. At first, she only watched from the doorway, clutching her blanket around her shoulders. She studied the way he split wood with powerful, precise strokes, the way he spoke low and steady to his horse, the way he repaired tools with patience rather than frustration. He lived simply, without cruelty. That alone was something new to her. One morning, when Caleb carried a bucket of feed to the chickens, he noticed her following a few hesitant steps behind. She said nothing, her eyes fixed on the ground, but when he scattered grain, she crouched to watch the birds cluck and peck. A faint spark lit her face, a trace of wonder breaking through her guarded expression. Caleb pretended not to notice. Though his heart tightened, it was the first time he'd seen anything close to joy in her since bringing her here. Later, he found her by the stream again, kneeling with her hands submerged in the cold water. She lifted them to her face, letting droplets trickle down her cheeks. He realized she wasn't just washing, she was relearning what freedom felt like. The simple act of touching the earth, the water, the air without chains became sacred. Caleb left her alone, understanding instinctively that this moment belonged to her, not him. When he returned one evening from gathering firewood, he found she had swept the cabin floor with an old broom and laid the bowls neatly on the table. She said nothing when he entered, her head bowed as though expecting scolding. Instead, he gave a short nod. "Looks fine," he said simply. Relief flickered across her face, so brief he almost missed it. From then on, she began to help with small tasks, mending with the scraps of fabric he had, arranging herbs, carrying water in small amounts. The language between them grew in slow fragments. She spoke little English, and Caleb no Apache, but they managed with gestures, expressions, and the occasional words she picked up. He would point at an object, name it, and she would repeat softly, sometimes with the faintest trace of a smile when he nodded approval. "Fire," he'd say, touching the hearth. "Water," lifting the cup. "Horse," patting the mare's side. Each word was a tiny bridge, building a fragile connection. One afternoon, Caleb coaxed her onto the horse's back. She stiffened. At first, clutching the saddle horn, but as the animal shifted gently beneath her, something lit in her eyes, hesitation giving way to awe. She rode only a few steps, Caleb leading with the reins, but when she slid down, she stood straighter. Her cheeks flushed. That night, she ate more heartily, as though the ride had awakened a hunger she'd long suppressed, not just for food, but for life itself. Caleb noticed other changes too. The way she sometimes hummed softly when she thought herself alone. The way her shoulders no longer hunched quite so low. The way she allowed herself to stand nearer the fire without needing the blanket like armor. Trust was still fragile, like glass that might shatter at a sudden noise, but there was progress. And with it came something Caleb hadn't expected. His own walls beginning to crumble. He had built his life on solitude, keeping the world at bay after years of war and loss. Yet watching her relearn how to live reminded him that he, too, had forgotten what it meant to truly feel alive. One evening, as they shared stew by the fire, Nayeli lifted her eyes and whispered one of the few English words she had mastered. Safe. The word caught in Caleb's chest, heavy and humbling. For her, safety was not a small thing, it was everything. He gave a slow nod, his voice low. Yes, safe. And in that moment, the cabin, once only a place of solitude, became something more. A place of healing. By late summer, the cabin had begun to feel almost like a sanctuary. Nayeli no longer jumped at every sound. She tended the chickens with a quiet pride, gathered berries near the stream, and even let Caleb guide her through short rides on his horse. For Caleb, watching her heal brought a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. But peace is a fragile thing. Easily broken dot, it was a morning like any other when Caleb noticed the dust on the horizon. He stood on the porch, wiping sweat from his brow, and squinted into the distance. 3 riders moved steadily across the flats, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. They weren't neighbors. Caleb had few, and none visited uninvited. His stomach tightened. Inside the cabin, Nayeli was humming softly as she ground herbs with a mortar. Caleb stepped in, his voice steady though his gut churned. "Nayeli, stay inside. Don't come out till I say." Her humming stopped. She looked at him, eyes narrowing with the instinct of someone who had lived too long in fear. She set the mortar down, her hands trembling slightly. "Who?" He forced a reassuring smile. "Maybe nothing, but best to be careful." By the time the riders reached the clearing, Caleb was leaning casually against the porch rail, though. His rifle rested within easy reach behind the door. The men dismounted, dust rising around their boots. Rough-looking type-scarred faces, hard eyes, pistols slung low. "Morning," Caleb greeted, voice calm. "Morning." The lead man replied, though there was nothing polite in his tone. He pulled a crumpled paper from his coat and let it dangle between 2 fingers. "We're looking for someone. Apache girl. Escaped from the mine up north. Owners ain't too happy about it." Caleb's jaw tightened. He kept his expression flat. "Can't help you." "Haven't seen anyone like that," the man smirked. "Funny thing. Folks down in Red Hollow said a cowboy been keeping to himself. Out here, word is he ain't so lonely no more." His eyes narrowed. "Mind if we take a look inside?" Caleb shifted, his body a wall between them and the door. "I do mind. This here's my home. Ain't no business of yours." The air thickened. The bounty hunters exchanged glances, hands drifting near their guns. Caleb felt the weight of the moment one wrong move, and blood would stain the clearing. Inside, Nayeli pressed her back against the cabin wall, her heart pounding. She had heard every word. The mine, the owners, the hunters. They had come for her. Memories of whips and chains surged back, suffocating her. She wanted to run, to hide, but her legs wouldn't move. The leader of the men sneered. "You think you can stand between us and our pay, cowboy? That girl ain't yours. She's property." Caleb's voice hardened, low as thunder. "Don't you call any person property on my land." His hand rested on the porch rail, steady as stone, though inside his chest his heart hammered. The standoff stretched, the hunters weighing their chances. Caleb's eyes never wavered. He was outnumbered, but he had the terrain, the cabin, and able forged in harder fights. Finally, the leader spat in the dirt. "This ain't over. She's worth a fortune, and men don't just let fortunes walk away. We'll be back." He mounted his horse, the others following suit, and the 3 rode off, leaving only a cloud of dust and a silence that pressed heavy on the clearing. Caleb let out a long breath, tension draining from his shoulders. He stepped back inside, where Nayeli stood pale and trembling. She stared at him with wide eyes, fear and shame mixing in her gaze. "They'll come again," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Caleb nodded grimly. "Aye, and when they do, they'll find out I don't scare easy." Nayeli looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time she realized this man was willing to risk his life for her. Not because of duty, not because of obligation, because he saw her as worth protecting. And that realization planted a fragile seed of hope in her heart. The days after the hunter's visit felt like living beneath a storm cloud. Caleb worked as usual, mending fences, hauling water, tending stock, but his eyes often scanned the ridgeline, watching for dust plumes. Nayeli, though trying to help, around the cabin, moved like a shadow, fear gnawing at her every step. Nights were the hardest. She lay awake, listening for hoofbeats in the dark, Caleb knew it was only a matter of time. Men like that didn't bluff. They'd return, and likely with more guns. He began preparing, quietly stocking ammunition, sharpening his knife, reinforcing the cabin doors. But he also did something else. He taught Nayeli. "Here," he said. One afternoon, pressing the cool weight of a revolver into her hand. She flinched but didn't let go. Caleb guided her fingers gently. "Don't think of it as a weapon. Think of it as a way to say, 'No more.' You point it only if you're ready to stand your ground." Nayeli hesitated, then nodded. For the first time in years, the idea of fighting back sparked within her. The attack came just after dusk, when the sky was streaked purple and gold. The first sign was the faint thud of hooves, many hooves rolling across the land like distant thunder. Caleb blew out the lantern and motioned Nayeli to crouch low by the hearth. Shadows moved outside, shapes circling the cabin. A voice rang. Out the leader of the hunters. "Morgan, we told you this wasn't finished. Hand over the girl, and maybe we'll let you keep your hide." Caleb's reply was cold, clear, and sharp as steel. "You'll get her over my dead body." Gunfire erupted, splintering wood, shattering the quiet night. Caleb fired back through a crack in the shutters, his rifle booming. Nayeli pressed her hands over her ears, trembling, but then remembered his words. No more. Bullets whined, thudded into walls. Smoke stung her eyes. Caleb moved with steady rhythm, loading, firing, ducking low, but there were too many. She saw it in his jaw, tight with strain, in the sweat beading his brow. He could not hold them off alone. Something inside Nayeli shifted. The years of slavery, of being beaten and silenced, of being told she was nothing, they rose like fire in her chest. She crawled to the window, lifted the revolver with shaking hands, and aimed at a shadow lunging from behind a tree. She squeezed the trigger. The man cried out, fell to the dirt. Nayeli gasped, her whole body quaking. But Caleb's quick glance held both surprise and fierce pride. The hunters faltered then. They had expected a frightened girl, not someone willing to fight. Caleb used the moment to press hard, his shots driving two more men back into the dark. The leader cursed, shouting for retreat. Hooves thundered away into the night, leaving only silence broken by Caleb's ragged breathing. The cabin smelled of smoke, gunpowder, and fear, but also of something new. Victory. Nayeli still clutched the revolver, her hands trembling so badly she could barely lower it. Her chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. Caleb moved to her side, gently easing the gun from her grip. "You did it," he said softly. Tears streaked her face as she whispered, "I don't want to be afraid anymore." Caleb brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch careful, reverent. "You're stronger than you know. Tonight proved it." For Nayeli, the moment was more than survival. It was a rebirth. She was no longer the mind's broken slave, hiding in the shadows. She had fought, and she had won. And in Caleb's steady gaze, she saw not only safety but something more, the promise of a life lived free, if she was brave enough to claim it. Outside, the night was quiet again, but neither of them doubted the hunters would return one day. The difference now was clear. Nayeli was ready to meet them. The night after the gunfight was long, filled with the scent of smoke and the echo of gunfire lingering in their ears. Caleb boarded up the shattered window, every movement steady and deliberate, but his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Nayeli sat by the hearth, wrapped in a blanket, staring at her trembling hands. She had pulled the trigger. She had struck down a man, yet as she sat there, something unexpected washed over her, not guilt, but relief. For years she had been powerless, a prisoner with no voice. Now, for the first time, she had stood up for herself. She had chosen to live. When Caleb finally sank into the chair beside her, their eyes met in the flicker of firelight. He looked older tonight, the fight written in the lines around his eyes. But there was also a warmth in his gaze that softened everything. "You saved my life out there," he said quietly. Naeli shook her head. "No, you saved me." Caleb leaned forward, his voice low and certain. "We saved each other." For a moment, silence hung between them, not heavy but full, like soil rich with possibility. Then Naeli spoke, her voice steadier than she expected. "I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to hide." Caleb studied her, the firelight reflecting in his tired eyes. "Then we won't. You've got as much right to this land, to this life, as any soul alive. You're free now. Don't ever forget that." The word free settled deep in her heart. It was a word she had never thought would belong to her again. In the days that followed, something shifted. The cabin, once a lonely outpost, began to feel like a true home. Caleb and Naeli rebuilt the shattered window together. They worked side by side in the garden, planted seeds in freshly turned earth, and cared for the animals. With each task, Naeli's confidence grew. The shadows of her past didn't vanish, but they no longer defined her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Naeli stood in the doorway, watching Caleb mend a bridle. The sight stirred something in her chest, a warmth, unfamiliar yet undeniable. She thought of all the men who had passed her by, who had seen her as less than human, a burden or worse, property. Caleb had never treated her that way. From the moment he found her, broken and starving, he had seen her not as a prize or a responsibility, but as a person. "Caleb?" she asked softly. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah?" She hesitated, her fingers clutching the doorframe. "Why did you help me? You could have turned me away." Caleb's expression softened. He set the bridle aside and stood, walking toward her with that slow, steady gait she had come to know. "Because I know what it feels like to be hollow. Inside, to lose everything and think you got nothing left worth living for." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "But you reminded me I was wrong. You gave me a reason again." Tears welled in Naeli's eyes, but they were not born of sorrow. For the first time in years, they were tears of hope. That night, as they sat together beneath the stars, Caleb reached for her hand. She let him, their fingers intertwining like roots binding into the soil. It wasn't a vow spoken aloud, nor a declaration sealed with ceremony, but it was a beginning. A quiet promise that whatever storms still lay ahead, they would face them side by side. Naeli lifted her face to the wide, open sky. Once, the stars had mocked her, glittering above the mines where she was shackled. Now they shone as witnesses to her freedom, her rebirth, and the strange, tender love that had begun to blossom in the heart of a lonely cowboy and a girl who had thought herself lost forever. The world still held danger. The hunters might one day return, but for the first time, Naeli felt no chains on her wrists, no collar on her neck. She was no longer property, no longer prey. She was alive, she was free, and she was not alone. And as Caleb's hand held hers, beneath the endless western sky, she knew that the life she once thought stolen from her had only just begun.